Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at my Phalaenopsis hieroglyphica. This is a species orchid and it does have a little bit of fragrance, but depending on who you are, you may disagree that it's actually a fragrance. It has a smell, and to me, I think it's just a smell because it's not very fragrant compared to my other very sweet fragrant orchids. But anyway, let's look into it. Let's dig in. So I bought this orchid probably almost 2 years ago, and it came with an existing spike. But last year was the first year that this spike actually elongated enough to produce a flower. But last year's flower, the petals were deformed. So at the time, I was worried that wondering whether this orchid actually had some kind of genetic defect. And so in that video from last year, I was saying that, well, we're gonna have to see if this orchid blooms again, which it has, so great news. If it blooms again, then we would be able to tell whether that is a isolated incident where for whatever reason, for an unknown reason, that the petals were simply deformed. The sepals were okay, but it's the top right and the top left petals that were simply crooked. But this year, very good news, right? As you can see here, so this orchid this year gave me 5 blooms. 2 blooms on the older spike, and then 3 blooms out of the new spike. So it's a very exciting time, and I'm really happy to make this video to share with you that this orchid is normal. This is a normal hieroglyphica, and it doesn't have genetic defects. When I bought this orchid, I was going through a phase where I was very fascinated with orchids with spots or dots or patterns on their sepals and petals. And I was also at a phase where I was very fascinated with species and especially orchids with fussy lips. So for example, Tetraspis or Speciosa, these are also species as well if you're new to the orchid hobby. So these are the orchids that I have that have really fuzzy lips, and I just absolutely adore them. For some reason, you know, that fuzzy lip just makes me feel that they're extra cute. And this orchid has really interesting characteristics in terms of the patterns on the flowers. But I don't know if these patterns remain the same. I mean, based on my observation, each flower would have a slightly different pattern. But it's not so different like how Tetraspis or Speciosa would do in terms of color. Their colors remain pretty much the same. You know, you have a little, mostly red, but then have a little bit of pink stripes toward the center, and then the lip area, the fuzzy lip area, is that light violet / fuchsia color. And in terms of fragrance, like I said earlier at the beginning of the video, it has some smell. It can definitely smell that there is something, but I wouldn't call it a fragrance because it doesn't smell like the sweet kind of fragrance that all my other fragrant Phalaenopsis would give out. So it has a smell, I'm just gonna say that. So I think this is the only thing that I don't like about this orchid, is that it's not a fragrance, it's a smell. And I remember smelling my friend's Bulbophyllum blooms, and some of those are completely like bad smells, but it's not, this orchid is not to that extent, but it's not fragrant. Okay, so this orchid in general is not difficult to take care of. it's actually currently in semi-hydro, and later this video you'll see a clip where I was showing you the roots and how it's doing inside the transparent container. But for now, you know, this orchid just is doing really well in terms of growing a lot of roots inside the container, but also outside the area, above the media. So area roots are also doing really well. And this orchid isn't really fuzzy, but because it tend to produce skinnier and longer leaves. So for those of you who would like to get an orchid of this kind, you really have to make sure that the container you use is somehow elevated, so that way the leaves are not dangling or, you know, just dangle on top, you know, on top of the of your growth space, because when you move around or you know, it's easier to damage the leaves. So you want to make sure you elevate it, because for my orchid, the leaves are longer or taller than the cup that this orchid is in. So I have to use another taller container just to prop it up, so that way the leaves are not touching the bottom of the surface. This orchid, when I first bought it, it was in moss, and then I transferred it to some kind of rock, chips, mixture of media, and it was doing okay. But the leaves were growing really, really slow and small, tiny. And then eventually I moved down to the southern portion of the United States, and then I put it into semi-hydro, and this orchid really just took off from there. It did not have any adjustment period. It just immediately adopted to the semi-hydroponic method. So it's doing really well, and I think I just kind of got lucky with this orchid being in semi-hydro. For some reason, my other friends are really struggling with their hieroglyphica, and they're telling me that the hieroglyphica is a very finicky and hard to take care of orchid, but for me, it's somewhat easy, or maybe I'm just lucky. I got lucky with this one. And here you can see it's in a transparent pot. I use that. And the roots are doing really well. A lot of the roots have grown into the reservoir, which is the portion below the 2 drainage holes, and you can even see that one of the roots actually came out of a hole. So this orchid right now is simply autopilot for me, because unless I decide that I want to give this orchid a bigger container, otherwise I can continue to grow this orchid in this container as long as there are viable roots in the inorganic media, which does not break down at all due to old age. But I do flush this orchid once a month by soaking it with just pure reverse osmosis water to dissolve accumulated salt buildup from fertilizer, for example. I do that, but then whenever, that's just once a month. But then every watering, so essentially every other week in my environment. So every 2 weeks I will give it water, and it's water with fertilizer. So it's a quarter strength fertilizer that I use. And when I soak this orchid, I soak it really well. So the water level is usually about 80 or 90%. But then when I add fertilized water, I only add the water to the point where the water will come out of the drainage hole, and that's it. I don't soak it. I don't soak 80-90% of the roots with fertilized water, because there are enough roots in the reservoir already. So this orchid can simply gradually take moisture and nutrients from the reservoir area. So that's just how I do it with these orchids, and they seem to be doing really, really well. And this one also has really good area roots, and this is just my personal observation in my environment. I noticed that orchids around or near my humidifier tend to grow more area roots. So I feel that the area roots do better when the air is more humid. Of course, you still need to make sure you have ventilation. So you cannot have stale air and have high humidity, because once you have these two, and then if the temperature gets too high, all three components are present, it is very likely your orchid will have root rot issue or some kind of fungal issue, because poor ventilation, high humidity, and high temperature, all three factors are present. That's a very big no-no, very, very dangerous situation for your orchid. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!